Hello everyone, you're listening to The Right Side of Gaming. Today we're going to be talking about all the black spells in Magic Legends. In Magic Legends, black is really good at sacrifice and reanimation, discard, life manipulation, gaining and losing life, as well as damage over time effects. So I want you to keep those in mind as we go along and look through all of these. First up, we have Death Cursed Fanatic, and when it dies, it's going to give you 1 black mana. So naturally, you can get that normally if it just dies while it's out on the field, or if it happens to die to a sacrifice effect to speed things up, you're going to get a little extra bonus out of it. Next, we have Drudge Skeleton, which has Regenerate. So if the card would be destroyed, instead heals to full life and loses the effect, so you can't repeatedly regenerate a creature unless it has an effect that lets you do that. We saw that with Evil Vazoa the other day. Generally, it's a one-time, it dies, and it comes back type of deal. So this is a great way to continuously trigger death triggers, because you're going to lose the creature, but then get it back, and you can trigger it again. We have Bone Tip Archer, which has an activated ability, so if you already have a Bone Tip Archer in play and you draw into it, you can pay to give it Regenerate. And again, that's going to give you the same type of benefits as you would with Drudge Skeleton. Next, we have Gruesome Reanimator, whose special ability makes it summon 1/1 skeleton tokens every so often. You have a maximum of 3 skeletons, and it'll take you about a minute and a half to get that many, assuming they're all still up as it goes. That's a great way to sort of go wide and get a lot more of those cheap creatures out into play, but you can sacrifice, buff, whatever. We have Darksworn Cleric, which has a lifelink. You're going to see several creatures in here with lifelink, but once per attack. So if it happens to, do an AoE or something, only one of those is going to trigger the lifelink. But once per attack, damage dealt by the creature is also going to heal you. So it's really in line with sort of the card game on that note. And its special ability is going to create a hazard. So you're going to have sort of your little AoE on the ground trap type of deals that deals damage over time to enemies inside of it. We have Drifting Shade. Shades in the card game have a lot of pump effects generally. You pay some mana, you get a little boost for the remainder of the turn. And that's the same in Magic Legends as well. It has an activated ability. If you draw into it, while you have Drifting Shade already on the field, you can pay 2 mana, and Drifting Shade is going to get +2/+2 for 15 seconds. That's, I guess, a nice little homage to the card game. We have Ghoulish Infector, whose special ability says that the creature you control with the highest toughness taunts nearby enemies for 6 seconds. That's basically going to give one of your creatures a repeatable taunt. And when it dies, it's going to deal 300% damage to nearby enemies based on its toughness. So it is a 2/3 creature. When it dies, it's going to deal damage as if it had 3 power instead of 2 power. So if you can buff up defenses, great. Or you can use it to have one of your other bigger, stronger creatures continuously gain taunt. Or you can just sort of make sure you put in weaker creatures than it, and it's just going to continuously be the target of its taunt, and then when it dies, do damage based on itself. We have Doomsci Wraith. It's a special ability that's going to deal damage over time and apply lesser vulnerability to enemies in a line. And that's going to increase the incoming damage. So every now and then it's just basically going to debuff enemy creatures so that they take more damage. We have Rotting Fintusker. Whenever a creature you control dies, this creature gains +1/+1 for 10 seconds. That works out really well with a lot of the sacrifice effects in black. And when you summon it, you're going to sacrifice the creature you control with the lowest combined power and toughness. So this would be a combined power toughness of 6, 6, 5. You get the idea. So whenever it's summoned, you're immediately going to sacrifice another creature if you have one. I guess in theory you could sacrifice Routing Fintusker if that's all you had out, but that's probably not the way to go. But if you sacrifice another creature, that's immediately going to bump it up to a 5/3. At least for a period of time. Also has a special ability that's going to do an AoE damage. We have Scathe Zombies. We see this in pretty much every color so far. You have a spell that's going to summon 3 creatures. This one costs a little bit more, it costs 4, but you're summoning 2/2 creatures instead of a 1/1 or a 1/2. So again, it's great for those go wide strategies. You have a lot of cheap bodies up or sacrificing. It works out well. We have Cabal Night, which has lifelink, so it's going to give you some life back whenever it attacks. It has a special ability that will charge forward, deal damage twice, followed by more damage to nearby foes. So it's going to charge forward, basically swing its axe a couple times, and then do an AoE. We have Corpse Fiend. Whenever another creature you control dies, Corpse Fiend gets a counter on it, and it gets +1/+1 for each counter on it. So whenever another creature dies, he gets a buff. And whenever he gets up to 5 of those counters, you can remove those, so he'll go from an 8/10 back down to a 3/5, but it'll create little hazards out in the field that are going to deal damage over time to enemies inside them. Next, we have one of our mythics, Dread Overseer. Other zombies you control get +1/-1. So if you have a 1/1 zombie out, it's going to become a 2/0, and it's going to die and trigger your various death effects. If it's stronger than a 1 toughness, it's still going to get a power boost, and this works out really well if you're doing sort of a go wide strategy along with sacrifice effects. So if you have a bunch of weak creatures out that you want to sacrifice, this is a great one to slot in. Next, we have another one of our mythics, the Abyssal Fiend. It has a special ability to sacrifice the creature you control with the highest combined power and toughness. And it's going to gain power and toughness equal to that for about 10 seconds. So if you have a really strong creature on the field, yeah, it's going to buff him up. But you probably don't want to do that with something really expensive that you just played. If you have something that's kind of low on health, it's a great way to sort of buff up the Abyssal Fiend. And of course, it's going to trigger your sacrifice effects, which we love in black. Next, we have Voracious Thrall, a special ability to pull enemies towards itself, and an activated ability. So we got to keep those separate. It has a special ability, which is just going to happen regularly, randomly, and an activated ability. So if you already have it on the field and you draw into it again, you can pay 2 and sacrifice it, which again, get all those sacrifice death effects. And it's going to deal damage to nearby enemies, which there'll probably be some because it keeps pulling enemies towards it. Next, we have Dark Gamble. You're going to discard a random spell. You don't have any choice over it unless you only had one other spell in your hand. So when you cast it, you want to make sure you are okay with losing whatever you have. And you're going to gain greater mana regeneration for 6 seconds. And that's going to be a theme in black. If you get something that maybe normally you wouldn't get in black, it's usually at a cost. You see that in the card game. Looks like we're seeing that in Magic Legends too. Next, we have Butcher. It's going to deal damage to enemies in a cone, and it's going to deal additional damage to enemies that are at 50% or less health. So if they're already hurt, they're just going to take more damage. I don't know if I can say the name of this one on YouTube, so I'm going to call it Darnable Pact. You can read it right there. It is one of our X spells. You draw a spell and lose 20% of your max life every second as long as you maintain the spell. So you're going to cast it and you can hold it down to draw more than one spell. It's just that for every card you draw, you're losing 20% of your max life. Since you have a max of 4 spells in your hand, you're only going to top out at 80% of your max life if you hold it down the entire time. So you're not going to kill yourself off with it if you haven't already taken damage, but I don't think the game will let you do that anyway. I think it'll stop you before you try to draw. Say you were at 70% health, it's going to stop you before you try to draw that 4th card. But again, you can see how You know, if you want to get something that maybe isn't normally in black, it's going to be at a cost. Usually in the card game, it's like, oh, you can draw a bunch of cards, but you're going to lose life. This is the same concept. Next, you have Unholy Boon. For 8 seconds, your creature with the highest toughness gets Regenerate, Lifelink, and +4, -2. So again, this can kill off a creature if it has a low enough toughness, which will trigger your death sacrifice stuff. But it also has Regenerate, so it's just going to come right back. And if it lived through it, if it had more than 2 toughness to begin with, you're basically going to get a +4 creature with lifelink, so it's going to really get a lot of life back to you. Next, we have Vicious Hunger, which is going to deal damage to an enemy and then heal you for that amount. So you have sort of that lifesteal effect that black likes to do. We have Wailing Souls. It's going to deal damage to enemies in a line. It's going to create a hazard in that line that's going to deal damage to enemies inside of it over time and give them lesser snare to reduce their movement speed. So you're dealing damage, initial damage, damage over time, and snaring. We have another one of our mythics, Annihilation. You're going to sacrifice all the creatures you control, and you're going to deal damage, plus an additional damage based on the combined damage of those enemies you sacrificed. So, you're always going to have at least some damage, even if you don't have any creatures out on the field. But the more creatures out you have, the more damage you're going to do. So if you had a go wide strategy, you have a bunch of little creatures, you're going to be doing a lot of sacrificing. Or if you had some big creatures, again, you can get a lot of power out of that. But you're always going to have at least some damage. We have Creeping Plague, which I think is a nice thematic approach for black damage in here. It's going to deal damage over time and an AoE, but it's also going to allow the affected enemies to spread that effect to other nearby enemies. So it is like they are, getting them sick, spreading this plague, which admittedly may not be the best thing to say or talk about after last year, but still, it works. We have Impale, that's just going to do a straight damage at target location effect. We have Grim Revival, which is going to resurrect the dead creature you control with the highest combined power and toughness at half of its maximum health. And if you have no dead creatures, it's going to create some 1/1 skeletons instead. So I like this approach. It's great because a lot of times you do want to resurrect something bigger, but if this is in your starting hand, so to say, if you don't have any creatures out on the field, they haven't died yet, maybe you just got into the mission, maybe you just went into an arena and everything, died and you lost everything. You're still going to get some effect out of it. We have Infest. It's going to deal damage, as well as damage over time, and apply lesser vulnerability so that they're going to take even more damage from your other attacks. And again, this is going to be in an AoE. We have Desecrate, which is going to create a hazard at a target location that deals damage to enemies inside of it over time. And you're going to sacrifice the creature you control with the lowest combined power and toughness. And if you do, it deals an additional amount of damage instantly. So if you have another creature, it's going to deal additional damage, like right off the bat, and then damage over time. We have Leech Outbreak, which is going to deal damage over time. And it's going to heal you over time as well for a specific amount plus an additional amount for each enemy affected. And it caps out as to how much additional healing you can get, so it's not like you can get it doesn't really benefit you to get a absolutely huge group and use it on. I mean, you're still going to do damage to all of them, which is great, but it's not going to give you additional healing. There is a cap on the amount of healing there. We have Parasitic Infection, which is going to deal damage over time and apply greater vulnerability to a target enemy. And if it would die before it expires, before that, damage over time and greater vulnerability ends, it's going to spread that to another enemy and refresh the duration. So if you killed it in 4 seconds, another enemy is going to get it, and they're going to get a full 5 seconds out of it. If you can keep killing them that way, you can keep spreading it, which works out really well. And I really like this sort of plague spreading approach to damage in black. We have Unearthed, which is going to root a target enemy. So that's going to keep them from moving for 2 seconds and deal damage 4 times in a cross centered on that target. So it is an interesting approach to AoEs that we don't really see in some of the others. Once you use it, you kind of get a feel for where the cross pops up, how big it is, that type of thing. We have Shadow Barrage, which is going to create a hazard at a target location that deals damage to a random target 4 times per second for 12 seconds. It's going to do random damage over time. And foes in it have lesser weakness, so they're going to take more damage. We have Abyssal Flame, which is going to create a hazard at a target location and deal damage over time. And it's going to crit and deal additional damage to enemies with 50% or less health. Again, this is one of those where instead of dealing a full 100% additional damage, this does 50% additional damage. We have Mutation. So for 30 seconds, your creatures get +2, -1. So again, it's one of those where you can use it to buff up creatures or kill them off. And again, get those sacrifice and death effects. We have Blood Pact. For 30 seconds, your creature with the highest power has lifelink. So it's going to give you at least some life back. And finally, we have one of my favorites, Open the Graves. For 30 seconds, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, so not some of those randomly summoned creatures or creatures that pop up by your effects, but the ones you're actually playing, whenever one of them dies, you're going to create a 2/2 zombie creature token for 30 seconds. It's a great way to really fill up your field, especially if you have a lot of sacrifice effects. You can just get a bunch of zombies. All the black spells we have for today. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you'd like to leave a like, comment, subscribe, that'd be great. If not, that's okay too. I understand. Either way, I hope you have an awesome day, and I will catch you next time.